to our enemies. F-A-F-O. If necessary, our troops can translate that for you.
We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America, and we're willing to die to protect it. Every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Guardian, and Coast Guardsman, each of us commits our very life to protect and defend that document, regardless of personal price.
It was really disheartening. I received a text from a person who I served with before, and he said to me, he said, you know, it's normal to disagree with the commander-in-chief. He said, but I don't know if it's normal to be embarrassed by him. Mm-hmm. And he said, and I'm embarrassed. You know, and when we take the oath, we take the oath that we are going to follow the Constitution of the United States of America, and we will follow the lawful orders of the commander-in-chief. It's the same thing, and it's the same very humble responsibility that I take as the commander-in-chief of the Maryland National Guard. That I know the Maryland National Guard and the Maryland Air Guard, they move on the command of the commander-in-chief, that I'm giving them lawful orders. But I also think there's a confidence amongst the members of the Maryland National Guard and the Maryland Air Guard is that I would only ever give lawful orders. And that's the struggle that I think for a lot of members of the military, they're figuring right now. We will follow the commands of our commander-in-chief. That's the oath that we took. When they're lawful. And I think there's a lot of people who right now, when they heard the words from the commander-in-chief yesterday about talking about using American cities as training grounds, they're not receiving lawful orders. In fact, they're receiving orders that are in direct violation.
Imagine a packed hall of America's most powerful military leaders, hundreds of generals and admirals, polished uniforms, medals catching the light, and yet not a single hand rises to applaud. Just complete silence. And what unseen force rendered these titans speechless? People are wondering what code, what conscience held them back from cheering a spectacle at the heart of power. Now, today we are going to peel back that silence. We dive into the moment when protocol, pride, and principle collided, and when 800 of America's highest officers stood still. Now, stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't what everyone's talking about, but it may rewrite how you see this moment in history.
So this week, Donald Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth convened over 800 military leaders from all over the world, admirals and generals, to hear some screed that was kind of a mixture of, well, here's a little bit of a sample.
I think we should maybe start thinking about battleships, by the way. Lore. That's L-O-R-E.
We don't have a military full of Nordic pagans.
I'm a very aesthetic person, and I don't like some of the ships you're doing aesthetically. They say, oh, it's stealth. I said, that's not stealth.
It was such an inappropriate speech for top military officers that the president had to remind the audience that it was okay for them to applaud.
And if you want to applaud, you applaud.
Which kind of reminded me of this scene.
Get back in the business of creating a more peaceful world. Please clap.
But of course, applause wasn't appropriate for that kind of a partisan screed in front of our top military officers. There was nothing appropriate, in fact, about that speech by either the president or the Secretary of Defense. But it wasn't just that it was a waste of time. There were some things in it were deeply disturbing. Pete Hegseth and the president also talked about how much pride they took in changing the name, or at least trying to change the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, with Hegseth even going so far as to saying the name change would somehow lead to more peace. That scene kind of reminded me of this scene from Dr. Strangelove.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Pete Hegseth, for his part, spent most of his time talking about the physical standards for flag officers, his desire that they have a rigorous fitness regime, and giving them grooming advice about how much facial hair they should have. He also took the opportunity to plug his book. One thing he wasn't clear on is whether this physical fitness standard would apply to the commander-in-chief. But besides the absurdity of all of this, there were elements of the president's speech that were just downright dangerous.
Those generals, admirals, and senior NCOs sat there in stone-faced silence, listening to the most outrageous speeches ever made in United States military history by the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. Secretary of Defense on his ridiculous rant trying to take to school generals, admirals, senior NCOs with 10 times the leadership ability, the education, and the experience that the failed Major Hegseth could ever begin to understand. And then they have to listen to the cognitively declined President of the United States, who I would now name as Dictator of the United States, tell this audience that they will be expected to wage war against the American people. That's exactly what Trump said. So don't get on here and try to tell me that he didn't say it. Training grounds in American cities. What does that mean? They're going to go in locked and loaded into American cities, American neighborhoods, and use American citizens as pop-up targets on a live fire training range? This is absolutely astounding abuse of power, which makes, by my estimation, Donald Trump a domestic enemy of the Constitution.
You guys might be laughing at Pete Hegseth and what he said in front of all the military leaders that were flown in from around the world on our dime, wrapping up his intimidation in woke terminology, no more beardos and all that kind of stuff. But something much more dangerous and sinister was happening. He called everybody together to say very clearly, we give the orders, and it doesn't matter how specific it is or how much it goes against what you're comfortable with, you do it or you're out. It's about much more than having a beard or being overweight. And I'm going to tell you why what he said was dangerous. Because at the same time, not by coincidence, Donald Trump was giving a rambling press conference where he was urging the military, suggesting that the military use U.S. cities to train military men and women against American citizens, to use American cities as a training ground. They are preparing the military for the next orders over the next couple of years, and you better be ready for it.
Pete Hegseth summoned scores of senior U.S. generals and admirals to Marine Corps base Quantico, and he appeared before them with a speech that was part policy pitch, part firebrand manifesto denouncing diversity programs, targeting woke culture, deriding fat generals, and demanding loyalty. Now, Hegseth's tone was confrontational. He told those whose hearts sink at his words he was telling them that you should resign, and he challenged standards of appearance and physical fitness, deriding current officers and threatening transformation at the top. Now, after his tirade, President Donald Trump followed, delivering remarks that ranged across domestic politics, virtue signaling support for his military base, and even floating the idea of using U.S. cities as training grounds, while warning that if anyone in the room didn't like what he was saying, they could leave at the expense of their rank or future. Now, the optics of that moment were jarring, because one might expect a show of solidarity, applause, visible assent, but instead silent stone faces, rigid postures, no spontaneous ovation. And what might this silence mean? It might suggest restraint, not weakness. In the military ethos, visible reactions can be interpreted as endorsements, and for flag officers sworn to the Constitution above any individual, that moment demanded caution. reaction. And to applaud a blatantly political speech would blur civil military lines in dangerous ways. Again, it speaks of discord between generations and values. Many of those senior officers have built their careers under norms of equity, professionalism, and a political service. Hegseth's declaration threatened to upend that tradition and replace it with loyalty-based exigency. And for some, the choices he offered, loyalty or exit, were unacceptable. Then, the silence is a signal. It broadcasts doubt, non-consent, and unwillingness to be co-opted into a spectacle. And when 800 of the highest-ranking officers remain unspeaking, their stillness becomes louder than applause. It is its own protest, yeah? And this moment reveals the tension of power. So Hegseth and Trump sought to harness symbolic authority, but the generals and admirals have real institutional legitimacy. They command respect, history, and the material force of the US military. Their refusal to play along, even in silence, pushes back against a narrative that power is absolute. Then, it invites questions about what happens next. Will this silence be followed by resignations, leaks, or internal resistance? Will the lines between the military and political spheres ossify or bend? The moment is a fulcrum, a boundary being tested. So many observers noticed in commentary circles the silence was read as the only appropriate reaction to a spectacle masquerading as leadership. And one Catholic opinion piece summed this as the newly minted Secretary of War pulled off the impossible. He made Trump look good, at least by comparison. The stone-faced reaction of the generals and his admirals, their silence spoke very loudly. And the Atlantic described the gathering as almost theatrical, a summoned audience, forced travel, expectations of loyalty, and observed the generals trying valiantly to maintain straight faces. Others noted that the silence may reflect internal division. Some considered resigning privately, others refused by public statement. So in the end, the silence is not an absence, it is a presence, it is a refusal, a holding of ground, a question left unanswered. Will power bend protocol, or will protocol bend power?